Hey guys, tonight we time travel to a celebration that's part joy, part chaos, and entirely medieval. Picture it, the year is 1328. The fields are muddy, the village pigs roam freely, and your neighbor Gertrude is already 5 meads deep before noon. You're headed to a wedding, but not just any wedding. This is your cousin's big day, and you're about to experience everything from stale barley bread to the awkward silence of an arranged union. The bells are clanging wildly from the little wooden church, and someone's roasting a bird that smells suspiciously like yesterday's dinner. You've got hay in your boots, your tunic itches like a cursed wool blanket, and the sun is blazing despite the fact that nobody here owns a single pair of breathable undergarments. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere far off, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing how many corners of the world we drift into together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive late, of course. Because in the Middle Ages, nobody has a watch. Instead, you rely on things like shadow length and chicken crow math, which, shockingly, are not the most reliable methods of timekeeping. By the time you get there, the groom is already sweating through his best wool jerkin and nervously fidgeting with a sprig of rosemary tucked behind one ear for luck. This isn't just superstition. Rosemary was believed to ward off evil spirits. And judging by the look on the bride's mother's face, it might need to work overtime. The whole village is here. It's not like anyone has other plans. Weddings are community affairs, equal parts sacred ritual and excuse to take a break from hauling dung. The air is thick with the scent of sweat, smoke, and suspicion. Someone's dog is barking at a goose. Someone else is bartering a turnip for a spot closer to the action. There's a definite sense that nobody really knows what's going on, but everyone agrees it's terribly important. You, being a reasonably close cousin, are allowed near the front, meaning you can actually see the bride's expression, which ranges from resigned to mildly allergic. She's wearing her finest, a linen dress dyed with plant-based pigments that cost her father 3 bushels of barley and a questionable deal involving a borrowed donkey. Her veil. Not white. That tradition hasn't arrived yet. It's more of a mustard yellow, probably from years of candle soot and careful re-dyeing. She adjusts it nervously, avoiding eye contact with the groom, who still isn't sure whether he's supposed to look happy or reverent. The priest is late, naturally. He's been summoned from the next village over and probably stopped for an extra mug of ale or a short lecture about eternal damnation. You make small talk with the guy next to you, who's eating something that looks suspiciously like pickled eel. He offers you a bite. You politely decline. At last, the priest arrives, huffing and puffing, his robe flapping behind him like a disheveled scarecrow. He clears his throat, opens his Latin prayer book, which almost nobody here understands, and begins mumbling something that sounds halfway between a blessing and a sneezing fit. The couple shuffles forward. The bride's father makes an extremely loud announcement of his daughter's dowry, more on that later, and there's a brief pause while 2 local lads attempt to shoo a goat out of the sacred area. You're not sitting. There are no pews, no chairs. You stand in the grass, swatting at flies, trying not to nod off while the priest goes on about divine unions and eternal bonds and something about flesh becoming one. A child screams in the distance. Someone drops a jug. You try not to laugh. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Medieval marriages could happen in 2 ways. There was the church wedding, like this one, ritualized and official, in the eyes of both God and nosy neighbors. But there was also handfasting, an older, simpler ceremony where the couple just clasped hands and said vows to each other in front of witnesses. Boom, married. Historians still argue whether this was legally binding or just a way to test the waters before the real deal. Either way, it was pretty common, especially when a priest couldn't be bothered or the couple wanted to skip the fee. Back in the ceremony, the couple makes their vows. "No, I do, that's later." Instead, it's a quiet, awkward mumble that gets lost in the cackling of a chicken. The priest finishes, splashes them with holy water, and declares them married. Just like that. No dramatic music. No throwing rice. Just the sound of a local boy belching and the crowd offering subdued claps. Now, to the part everyone's actually here for, the food. A sudden cheer erupts as the first trays are brought out. Okay, trays is generous. It's more like wooden planks balanced on barrels, covered with chunks of bread, stewed root vegetables, and the mysterious roasted bird from earlier. It might be goose. It might not. You don't ask. But there's something comforting in the chaos. Despite the grime, the odd smells, and the lingering threat of a dog fight breaking out over spilled broth, there's laughter. There's music, or at least a man with a bagpipe and a very enthusiastic goatskin drum. You start to forget that you haven't bathed in 3 weeks and that your left foot is numb from standing too long. And just when you're starting to relax, someone taps your shoulder and whispers, "You did bring a gift, right?" You didn't. You panic. And that's when you learn the hard way that in medieval weddings, guests are expected to offer something: a jar of honey, a bit of cheese, or at the very least, a blessing in rhyme. You scramble for a rhyme and end up muttering something about joy and cheese. They nod solemnly, which might be good, or might mean you've just cursed their firstborn. No pressure. The wedding may be underway, but let's be honest, you're far more concerned with what you're wearing to this thing. Because while everyone's pretending it's about love and holy vows, the truth is people are judging your outfit as if this were a medieval version of the red carpet. And unfortunately for you, your options are limited to wool tunic and, also, wool tunic, but with slightly fewer holes. This morning, you rifled through your wooden chest, the one with a single iron clasp that squeaks like a dying rat every time you open it, and you stared down at 2 choices: your everyday tunic, brown and crusty with mystery stains, or your special occasion tunic, which smells slightly less like fermented cabbage. Naturally, you go with the fancy one. It's dyed a dull grayish blue, once vibrant, now just tired. Dyed fabrics were expensive, and you happen to know your aunt once traded 5 eggs and a haunch of dried venison for that dye. It's tradition. It's pride. It's itchy beyond belief. You yank it over your head and immediately regret every life decision that led to this. The collar scrapes against your neck like sandpaper blessed by Satan. Underneath, you've layered a linen undershirt, if you're lucky, or just let the wool work its course, scratchy magic directly against your skin. There is no winning here. Footwear. Don't make us laugh. You own 1 pair of shoes, passed down from your older cousin, who had suspiciously wider feet. They're made from poorly tanned leather and tied together with bits of string that gave up on life several weeks ago. One sole flaps as you walk. The other has what might be a squirrel bite. The mud outside doesn't help, either. By the time you arrive at the ceremony, your toes are already soaked and developing what 14th century medicine would probably call toe melancholy. And let's not even start on accessories. You don't have a belt. You have a cord, fraying, formerly white, now more of a troubling beige. You cinch it around your waist like a sad sack of potatoes, hoping it makes you look presentable. Jewelry. Maybe a wooden bead on a leather string if you're lucky, or noble. Or both. But since you're neither, you settle for the single feather you found in the barn and stick it behind your ear. No one's impressed. Least of all the chicken you stole it from. But the nobles? Oh, they're another story entirely. If you're near a castle wedding, you'll spot lords and ladies in gowns made of silk and velvet. Yes, actual silk. Imported from the East, traded for spices, gold, and possibly someone's cousin. Historians still argue whether certain dyes like Tyrian purple were reserved exclusively for royalty, but what we do know is that the brighter your outfit, the more coin your family probably hoarded while others ate turnip stew. Lady Godfrey, for example, is wearing a flowing green gown embroidered with golden thread and lined with squirrel fur. Yes, squirrel. It was fashionable. You watch her try to walk through the mud with two servants holding up her hem while a third throws herbs on the ground to sweeten the air. It doesn't work. Meanwhile, the men strut around in hose, basically tight-fitting wool legwear that clings in all the wrong places. Some pair it with short tunics or padded doublets, which makes them look like angry pillows. Their shoes? Pointy-toed marvels called polanes. The longer the toe, the fancier the man, or the more impractical. One nobleman has tripped 3 times already, but he insists it's part of the charm. Hair is its own battlefield. If you're a peasant man, you've probably got shoulder-length curls, unintentional, and if you're married, you might wear a cap to signal your status. Women, on the other hand, work small miracles with braids, veils, and a strange contraption called a wimple, which wraps around the chin and covers the neck, leaving just the face exposed. Think, medieval hazmat chic. You overhear someone say that in France, it's now fashionable for noblewomen to pluck their hairlines to look more elegant. You clutch your eyebrows protectively. Fashion hurts, but not that much. The bride, bless her, is layered in about 4 different garments, a chemise, a kirtle, a surcoat, and a veil. Each one slightly heavier than the last, and each meticulously stitched by candlelight over the course of 3 months while her mother criticized every seam. She looks radiant, if slightly overheated. You spot sweat dripping down the side of her nose. Her shoes are soft leather slippers dyed a pale red, likely her most prized possession, just ahead of the comb she uses once a week. Now here's the quirky part. In some regions, it was customary for brides to wear their hair loose on their wedding day as a symbol of virginity. That might seem charming until you realize just how filthy medieval hair could get without modern shampoo. Soap was made from animal fat and lye, and conditioner was more of a hopeful prayer. If the bride lets her hair down, it's less of a sensual gesture and more of a lice party waiting to happen. As you stand there, adjusting your sweat-dampened tunic and trying not to faint from the scent of damp wool and overcooked parsnips, you wonder, was it always this difficult just to look presentable? Yes. Yes, it was. Even sumptuary laws, the official dress codes of the day, didn't make things easier. These were actual legal restrictions telling you what you could wear based on your social rank. If you dared to wear silk or fur without the proper titles or income, you could be fined, flogged, or, more terrifying, publicly ridiculed. It was fashion policing, but with more pitchforks. Still, despite the discomfort and the judgmental glances, there's a certain camaraderie to it all. You're not the only one tugging at your sleeves or fanning yourself with a hunk of stale bread. Everyone's dressed to the medieval nines, for better or worse, bound together by a common desire to celebrate, and to look slightly better than the person standing next to them. So you straighten your tunic. Brush the mud off your hem. And pretend that the smell definitely isn't coming from you. You've survived the wardrobe ordeal, but now let's talk about why anyone's even getting married in the first place. Because spoiler alert, this isn't about love, not in the way you'd hope. In medieval times, marriage is a contract, a negotiation, a chess move played with cattle, land, and inheritance. It's the original multiplayer strategy game, except everyone's wearing too much wool and no one's allowed to smile. You're standing awkwardly near the ale barrel, sipping something warm and sour, when you overhear the groom's father talking about the real reason this wedding is happening: acreage. The bride's family owns a decent patch of land just over the ridge, a few fertile strips for barley and 2 cows with decent udders. The groom's family? More pigs than pride, but they've got a strong son and a long-standing grudge against being poor. Match made in heaven. Marriage is less about emotion and more about economic survival. If you're a peasant, you marry for labor. More hands means more harvest. More harvest means more tax for the local lord, which means fewer beatings. Maybe. Historians still argue whether peasant families had much choice in their children's partners or if economic pressure made that choice more of a suggestion wrapped in guilt and mud. Among the nobility, things get even more transactional. Marriages here are tactical alliances. House A joins with House B to prevent House C from stealing everyone's sheep. Daughters are bargaining chips. Sons are air machines. Your emotional needs? Save those for confession. You might think, surely there were some love matches. And there were. Sort of. Occasionally. Maybe. One chronicle speaks of a farmer who married his sweetheart over his father's objections, and then lost his inheritance and was exiled to a swamp. So yes, romantic. But muddy. Let's get quirky for a moment. In some regions, contracts weren't sealed with a kiss or a handshake. Nope. You'd swap tokens, maybe a knife, a glove, or a twig shaped like a heart. If that doesn't scream lifelong commitment, I don't know what does. And if you didn't have an actual contract written out, because paper is rare and expensive, you'd declare your intention publicly, sometimes in the marketplace, sometimes in front of your local alewife. If she remembered, great. If she was too drunk, well, good luck proving it. The church, of course, is very involved. Marriage is one of the 7 sacraments, and it's meant to mirror the holy union between Christ and the church. A beautiful metaphor, until you realize the church also frowns on things like remarriage, premarital anything, and marrying your 5th cousin, even if she has a really nice sheep. But the church's definition of too closely related was, shall we say, generous. At one point, canon law banned marriage up to the 7th degree of kinship. That's basically everyone in your village. By the 13th century, they relaxed it to the 4th degree, which still required a lot of awkward genealogical charts and a papal dispensation if you wanted to marry someone who lived on your street. You sip your ale and wonder, what would you even offer if you were the one getting married? You've got a goat with a limp, half a jug of honey, and a solid understanding of barley fermentation. Not nothing, but not exactly dowry gold. Dowries are a whole separate beast, and we'll get into that more in a moment. But here's the gist: if you're the bride, your family is expected to offer something: money, land, linens, even livestock. It's not a payment for the groom so much as a way to ensure the bride isn't a financial burden. In theory, the dowry helps the couple get started. In practice, it's a tense negotiation that sometimes involves angry uncles and accusations of witchcraft. The groom might offer a bride price, too, a symbolic gift to the bride's family. Depending on local custom, this could range from silver coins to a particularly fat goose. Some communities even had a morning gift, a present the groom gave the bride the morning after the wedding night. The implication is clear. Yes, that implication. If the gift was generous, he was satisfied. If it was a small turnip, well, that's between them and their confessor. Let's not forget the role of matchmaking. While you're in the corner trying not to look like you're eavesdropping, an elderly woman with a toothless grin sidles up to you and starts talking about her niece. She's not subtle. This is medieval Tinder. These matchmakers, usually older women or the local priest, keep detailed records in their heads: who's widowed, who's fertile, who owns 2 pigs and a cart. It's matchmaking meets livestock appraisal. Sometimes, communities held special events for young people to meet. Fairs, feast days, and religious festivals doubled as dating pools. You'd lock eyes across a maypole, or exchange shy smiles over a shared cup of weak cider. And if sparks flew, well, congratulations. You'd still need your parents' blessing, the church's permission, and at least one witness who could swear you weren't already married to someone else. The strangest thing, though, consent mattered. At least, in theory. Church law required mutual consent between the bride and groom. Without it, the marriage could be invalid. Of course, defining consent in a world of family pressure, economic dependence, and social expectation is murky at best. But it's a start. One medieval tale tells of a young woman who refused to speak during her wedding. The priest, unsure what to do, declared the ceremony null and blamed it on the devil's interference. Drama. So, as you stand there with your lukewarm ale and crusty bread, watching 2 nervous villagers tie the knot while their families whisper about acreage and beehives, you realize, medieval weddings aren't about love stories. They're about survival. About merging resources. About making sure your cows have a future. And yet, sometimes, in a quiet moment between goat trades and awkward blessings, 2 people actually do fall in love. It's rare. It's risky. But when it happens, it feels like a small miracle, one that no priest or dowry can predict. And just for a second, you smile. You're halfway through your second piece of stale oat bread, trying not to chew too loudly while the bride's cousin plays a mournful tune on a single-string fiddle. There's talk all around of the wedding being well-matched, which really just means that both families haggled long and hard over chickens, plows, and the size of the bride's linen chest. But now you're starting to wonder, how did these 2 even meet? Welcome to the dazzling world of medieval courtship, emphasis on the awkward. If you're picturing candlelit letters and slow strolls through flower-draped meadows, stop right there. Courtship in the Middle Ages is more like a village-wide negotiation with the occasional romantic glance, heavily chaperoned and frequently interrupted by cows. You look around at the newlyweds. He's red in the face, she's staring at the ground, and neither has said more than 3 words to each other in the past hour. Chances are, they only spoke a handful of times before today. If you're a peasant, you might have had a few fleeting opportunities to court someone, at the annual fair, during planting season, or while hauling firewood from the same forest. But don't get your hopes up, every conversation is supervised, and every gesture is weighed like gold. Take the window visit. That's right. One of the boldest moves in medieval courtship is standing outside your potential beloved's house and chatting through a window while her family looms behind the curtain. Romantic? Sort of. Terrifying? Absolutely. Especially if her older brother's polishing a scythe within earshot. In some regions, courtship customs were tied to the calendar. Harvest time and feast days created brief pockets of socially acceptable mingling. There might be dancing, modest and formal, with plenty of room between partners, or a bit of flirtation masked as small talk about wheat yields. In one documented case, a young man serenaded a girl with a lute. She responded by throwing a turnip at his head. Historians still argue whether this was rejection or an extremely niche sign of interest. And then there's bundling. You've probably heard the term. It sounds cozy. It's not. In parts of rural Europe, bundling involved a courting couple lying in bed together, fully clothed, sometimes even sewn into separate sacks, while family members ensured nothing improper occurred. Imagine trying to make meaningful eye contact while wrapped in a potato sack and being monitored by grandma. Peak romance. The nobility did things a little differently. Instead of bundling, they wrote poetry. Tons of it. Troubadours composed long verses comparing their lady loves to swans, roses, and occasionally, death. Because nothing says, "Be mine," like rhyming about eternal suffering. These poems were part of the courtly love tradition, a highly idealized and often unconsummated flirtation between a knight and a noblewoman, usually someone else's wife. It was dramatic, it was performative, and it absolutely did not reflect everyday medieval marriage. Still, it offered an outlet. A knight might wear his lady's token, like a ribbon or glove, into battle. She, in turn, might gaze wistfully out of a stone window and sigh a lot. It's all very swoony. And completely separate from actual matchmaking, which was still happening 3 castles over via messenger pigeon and land-grabbing deals. Now for a quirky custom, in some Germanic traditions, a suitor might signal his intention by leaving a branch or flower on the doorstep of his love interest. If she left it untouched, he was in the clear. If it was gone the next day, things were looking good. But if it reappeared, with a beetle tied to it, or worse, he might want to reconsider. The Middle Ages really knew how to make a point with horticulture. One young man, according to a 14th-century village record, tried to court his sweetheart by carving her name into a tree. Unfortunately, he misspelled it and accidentally professed undying love to her neighbor. The resulting drama lasted 3 planting seasons. You can't help but wonder what advice your fellow wedding guests might give. One toothless old man insists that staring directly into a girl's eyes for 7 seconds guarantees marriage. A nearby widow claims that if you can make a girl laugh while she's churning butter, she's yours. Both of them are probably making it up. Or worse, they're right. But beyond all the quirky traditions and suspicious advice, there's a more serious undercurrent to medieval courtship. For women especially, the stakes are high. Marrying well, economically, not romantically, can mean the difference between a stable life and constant hardship. A poor match could tie you to a violent man, a barren plot of land, or a house with 5 other wives and no indoor cooking pot. This is where dowries and reputation come into play. A girl seen too often with a boy, without chaperones, might be considered damaged goods, regardless of what actually happened. Gossip moves fast in small villages. One kiss in a hayloft can ruin a name. It's not fair. It's not new. But it's the reality. And parents work hard to prevent it. Which is why those bundling sacks are stitched so tight and why window visits come with an audience. Even within these constraints, though, love finds its way. You hear whispers of couples who married in secret, or who eloped and returned years later with children, goats, and stories. You hear tales of forbidden lovers buried side by side, of long-distance romances carried by pilgrim messengers, and of peasants who chose each other despite dowry drama and village disapproval. So maybe there's hope. You look across the table and see the bride, now laughing softly as her new husband tries to eat stew without spilling it on his tunic. It's not poetry. It's not roses. But it's real. And in a world where survival is hard enough, sometimes laughter and shared stew are all you really need. You've barely finished wondering whether the bride and groom even like each other when the next act of this strange medieval marriage play unfolds, the dowry. Ah yes, the time-honored tradition of turning family heirlooms, wool sacks, and the occasional goat into marital currency. You shift your weight on the wooden bench, trying not to look directly at the two fathers arguing over whether the extra goose counts as part of the deal or a generous gesture of goodwill. Spoiler, it's neither. It's a bribe. A dowry, in theory, is the portion of wealth a bride brings into her new household. It might include land, coin, livestock, household items, or even clothing. In practice, it's a source of major tension and subtle bragging rights. If your daughter marries well, you've invested wisely. If not, you've basically given away your best linen sheets and 1/3 of your chicken supply for nothing. You glance at the bride's mother. She's looking slightly smug. Word is, her daughter brought 2 brass pots, a silver brooch, 3 strong hens, and a carved chest containing wool enough for 4 tunics. Not bad. And let's not forget the sack of grain they forgot to mention, which was quietly slipped into the couple's new cottage under cover of darkness. On the other side of the table, the groom's father is still frowning, mumbling about how he expected a second goat and maybe a pair of boots. Because nothing says everlasting union like passive-aggressively complaining about footwear at your son's wedding feast. Historically, dowries varied widely by region, class, and even the bride's perceived attractiveness. Yes, beauty sometimes increased the expected dowry. Which feels backwards, but welcome to the Middle Ages, where logic was filtered through patriarchal land disputes and ale. For peasants, dowries were often small but essential. A daughter without one might find herself unmarried, or married to someone with very little to offer in return. In many villages, the community would step in to help. There were dowry funds, yes, actual communal funds, set up to help poor girls marry, often collected from church alms or leftover tithes. Imagine your future depending on whether the local priest decided you were dowry-worthy. No pressure. Among the nobility, dowries could be massive, entire estates, elaborate tapestries, wardrobes stuffed with imported silks, and piles of coin. It wasn't uncommon for political alliances to be sealed with eye-watering sums. One royal dowry included a castle, 3 rivers, and an extremely old horse with diplomatic immunity. Then there's the reverse of the dowry, the bride price or mourning gift. In some cultures and regions, the groom, or his family, would offer a sum or gift to the bride's family, symbolizing both gratitude and a kind of acquisition fee. Mourning gifts were typically smaller and more symbolic. One historical record tells of a groom who gave his bride a single silver spoon the morning after their wedding, engraved with a message that may or may not have included the phrase, "Well done." Quirky custom alert: in parts of Scandinavia, grooms were expected to provide a ceremonial axe as part of the marriage arrangement. Not for violence, mind you, just to show they could protect the household. The bigger the axe, the better the man. Historians still argue whether this was purely symbolic or whether some brides kept them, just in case. Dowries weren't always about generosity, they could also be used as leverage. If a marriage failed or the husband mistreated his wife, the dowry might be reclaimed. That gave the bride's family some degree of power, at least on parchment. Whether it actually helped, that depended heavily on local customs, the family's status, and how many armed cousins they had. But not everyone got a say. For many girls, the dowry negotiation was handled entirely by the men in the family. Fathers, uncles, grandfathers, they met, drank heavily, and discussed sheep like stockbrokers on a medieval trading floor. The bride herself? Often not even in the room. She might hear about the deal secondhand, somewhere between salting fish and helping her sister make candles. You overhear a snatch of conversation from a couple of older villagers reminiscing about a long-ago bride whose dowry included an entire vineyard. She married a man 20 years her senior. She never smiled again, someone mutters, before taking a long drink from their mug. Romance. Still, dowries weren't just about wealth. They were a symbol of status, and families went to absurd lengths to make them look impressive. Linen would be bleached and refolded to appear brand new. Jewelry would be borrowed from cousins and paraded as heirlooms. Even livestock was temporarily fattened for inspection day. One recorded case involved painting spots on a cow to make it look rare. It wasn't. But the groom's family didn't realize until well after the wedding feast. Of course, things didn't always go smoothly. Dowry disputes could drag on for years, sometimes leading to cancelled engagements, local feuds, or in extreme cases, open violence. A chronicle from Yorkshire tells of two families who fought over a promised duck and ended up burning each other's hay bales in retaliation. Love may conquer all, but poultry disputes. Eternal. And then there's the looming threat of dowry fraud. Say a father promised 4 goats but delivered 2.5 and a very convincing sheep. If discovered, the groom's family might appeal to the local lord, the church, or even the king's reeve. The results were rarely satisfying. Usually, someone ended up fined, humiliated, or required to publicly apologize with their hat off. Brutal. Still, the dowry served its purpose. It ensured the bride had resources. It bound families together in mutual debt. It gave the couple a fighting chance at survival, assuming they didn't immediately lose all their livestock to a winter storm or a neighbor with loose fences. As you chew thoughtfully on your third piece of dark bread and try not to think too hard about the bride's chest full of bridal linens, you realize something odd. In all this talk of contracts, livestock, and property, no one's actually mentioned feelings. But then again, maybe that's the point. In this world, love isn't measured by poetry. It's measured by how well you fold your blankets, whether your hens lay regularly, and whether your father remembered to throw in that extra goose. If you were hoping for a rowdy bachelor party with questionable decisions and a medieval cover band, think again. Your pre-wedding festivities begin not with dancing or feasting, but with something far more humiliating. Welcome to your despedida de soltero, 14th century style, where the main theme is public embarrassment and the party favors include feathers, cold mud, and occasionally, getting tied to a barn door. You stand to the side of the village square, clutching a mug of sour ale as the groom is dragged into the center by his friends, if we can even call them that after what's about to happen. They're whooping and hollering, hoisting him onto a wooden bench as he protests through laughter and half-hearted threats. You're told this is all in good fun, but the glint in someone's eye suggests you should hide your belt. The custom varies from region to region, but the idea remains the same. The groom must endure a ritual humiliation that serves as both a farewell to bachelorhood and a final check on his courage. In this case, it begins with a bucket of ale being dumped over his head, followed by a crown made of pig intestines. Classy. Historians still argue whether these acts were symbolic cleansing rituals or just medieval folks having too much fun with limited entertainment. Either way, the village loves it. Children shriek with laughter, old men cackle, and even the parish priest hides a smirk behind his mug. Next, the groom's legs are tied together, and he's made to hop around the square while someone plays a recorder very badly. It's hard to say what the goal is, tradition, probably, but the audience is thoroughly enjoying the spectacle. One woman throws a turnip. It misses and hits you. Congratulations, you're part of the ritual now. These antics aren't confined to just the groom. In some towns, the bride also faces a form of farewell ritual, albeit less public and slightly more symbolic. She might be bathed and dressed by female relatives while they sing bawdy songs and offer cryptic advice like, "Don't let him keep the boots on," and, if he snores, "sleep with garlic." You're not entirely sure what that means, but it's filed away under, "to research never." Some customs take things even further. In certain parts of France, for example, the groom might be paraded through town on a donkey, wearing women's clothes. This is not optional. If he refuses, the villagers may gather outside his home at midnight and bang pots and pans until he agrees. This cacophony is called chivalry, and it is both a form of social pressure and low-budget entertainment. You watch as the groom is doused again, this time with milk, and then wrapped in a sheet that someone claims was once used in his uncle's wedding. The symbolism is unclear. Maybe it's about fertility. Maybe it's just what happens when you let farmers plan a party. Then comes the mock wedding. This is your favorite part. A friend of the groom, usually the loudest, drunkest one, is dressed up as a fake bride, complete with a cabbage veil and a beard. The crowd roars as the fake bride recites ridiculous vows like, "I promise to churn your butter and beat your socks daily." The groom, barely keeping a straight face, plays along, reciting oaths of eternal loyalty to this vegetable-draped impostor. You can't help but laugh. It's ridiculous. It's crude. But somehow, it's also kind of sweet. Beneath the feathers and fake veils, there's real affection here, tough love, maybe, but love nonetheless. Quirky fact time: in some medieval communities, grooms were given a literal grooming before the wedding. Friends would shave their beards, trim their hair, and sometimes even scrub their feet. It was a symbolic purification, preparing the man for his new life as a husband. Of course, depending on how the ale flows, it often turned into more of a shaving mishap than a meaningful moment. One poor lad once had his eyebrows removed by accident. The priest married him anyway. The line between tradition and prank is very blurry in these events. Sometimes it veers into the bizarre. There are documented cases of grooms being locked in barrels and rolled down gentle hills. In other areas, they were forced to stand on one leg while reciting the Lord's Prayer backward. Allegedly, this was to prove their readiness for marital challenges. In reality, it probably just proved who could keep a straight face the longest. Of course, if you're noble, your farewell to freedom looks a bit different. It's less mud and feathers and more banquets and hunting trips. A noble bachelor might spend the days before his wedding hawking, feasting, and drinking himself into a stupor with his male companions. These events were lavish but not necessarily joyful. Often, they were seen as obligations, staged for politics more than pleasure. One infamous count in Burgundy reportedly threw a week-long pre-wedding festival that included daily justs, a roasted ox stuffed with geese, and a juggler who set his own shoes on fire. The marriage lasted 3 months. Back in your village, the groom is now being carried, yes, carried, on a makeshift litter toward the edge of town, where he'll be tied to a tree, to reflect on his choices. Tradition says he must remain there until sunset, guarded by his friends, who alternately feed him bread and insult his singing voice. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. And yet, everyone's smiling. Even the bride, peeking through the shutters, seems amused. The groom, though thoroughly soaked and slightly bruised, is beaming. He knows it's all part of the game. Tomorrow, he becomes a husband. Tonight, He's the village's honorary clown, and he wears that role like a badge of honor. You sigh, finish the last sip of your ale, and wonder, if this is how they treat you before the marriage, what happens after? You'll find out soon enough. The sun is beginning to dip below the treetops now, casting long, golden shadows across the trampled grass. The wedding feast is reaching its crescendo, or perhaps it's just the collective groaning of full bellies and overworked outhouses. Either way, it's time for one of the most unpredictable, and potentially regrettable, parts of the medieval marriage, the wedding night. No, we're not going into the bedroom, thank you very much. We're staying respectfully at the edge of the straw mattress, watching this awkward tradition unfold like a goose trying to do arithmetic. But make no mistake, the medieval wedding night is not the private, candlelit affair you might imagine. It's communal. It's ceremonial. And it's occasionally attended by your in-laws. Yay! After a full day of feasting, dancing, toasting, and watching a drunken man try to play the harp with a chicken bone, the newlyweds are finally ushered toward the beating ceremony. That's not a typo, it's called beating, and yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. In many medieval communities, the couple didn't simply slip off into the shadows. No, they were escorted to bed by an entourage of family, friends, and what can only be described as too many witnesses. Sometimes they were cheered along. Sometimes there were songs. And sometimes, a few helpful aunts would throw flower petals or shove them bodily toward the mattress with cries of, "Get on with it." The logic behind this public-to-private transition is complex. At its core, it's about legitimacy. A marriage wasn't considered fully valid unless it was consummated. And to make sure that happened, no lies, no last-minute cold feet, there were witnesses. Not necessarily in the room, but close enough to hear something that could be interpreted as physical activity. Sometimes, a priest or elder would bless the bed. Sometimes, neighbors would bang pots and pans outside the door, just to set the mood. One record from a Yorkshire village mentions a local lute player who was hired to strum gently until the deed was done. He left after 2 songs and half a bowl of broth, so we can only assume it went fairly quickly. There's also the matter of the bedding token. In certain noble households, the bride and groom were expected to produce evidence, the next morning, typically a stained sheet, as proof of consummation. This gross tradition was sometimes handled with incredible ceremony. The sheet would be displayed to witnesses, blessed, or even paraded through the village in very awkward triumph. Historians still argue whether this was widespread or mostly theatrical one-off nonsense, but the anxiety it caused was very real. In cases where the bride was especially young, which, disturbingly, was not uncommon in the Middle Ages, the bedding could be delayed for months or even years until she was of age. And what of age meant varied wildly depending on location, religion, and whether or not the girl's father was particularly ambitious. Let's not dwell too hard on that. But let's bring in something lighter, a quirky but true fact. In parts of medieval France and England, guests would sometimes wait outside the couple's room and sing bawdy songs all night. These were known as bedding songs, and they were a mix of lewd humor, gentle mockery, and occasional heartfelt wishes. Think of it as a drunken medieval Spotify playlist, only you couldn't turn it off and it probably included your uncle. You glance at the cottage where tonight's bride and groom will eventually be evaluated. It's small, thatched, and likely only has one room with a curtain dividing the bed from the cooking pot. Not exactly private. Still, someone has scattered herbs and straw on the floor to bless the space, and there's a jug of milk with a sprig of rosemary beside the bed, for good luck and fertility. You're told the milk should be drunk after, though no one seems to know exactly why. And what of the couple? They're doing their best to look relaxed. The groom has finally changed out of his beer-soaked tunic. The bride has removed her veil and now clutches a small loaf of bread, another symbol of prosperity. Neither of them is smiling much. The pressure is immense. It's not just about their happiness. It's about legitimacy, dowries, bloodlines, gossip, and the village's weird obsession with new sheets. In noble circles, the betting could be even more absurd. There are documented accounts of kings and queens being tucked in by entire entourages of bishops, barons, and whispering ladies-in-waiting. The bed might be inspected, the couple blessed, and the door locked from the outside. Talk about romantic. One royal wedding in 15th century Spain included a public betting, where the king and queen were literally put into bed in front of witnesses, fully clothed, thankfully, while someone read a long list of expectations for the coming marriage. The audience was dismissed after the reading, and only then did the door close. Historians debate whether this was more about politics or spectacle. Either way, it sounds horrifying. Meanwhile, back at your village celebration, the festivities have mellowed. The music is softer, the food mostly gone, and the sky painted in streaks of silver and deep indigo. A few guests still linger by the fire, swapping stories and pretending not to be listening for sounds. You shuffle your feet awkwardly and try not to make eye contact with anyone holding an empty wine jug. Not everyone takes part in the betting ritual. Some families are more private. Some skip the public walk and simply trust the couple to sort things out. But in this village, they're traditionalists. So when the old midwife lights a candle and begins humming the ancient betting song, everyone knows what time it is. The bride and groom exchange a glance, equal parts nervous, exhausted, and resigned. They rise, hands clasped, and the crowd parts to let them pass. You step aside, nod politely, and try very hard not to look too curious. The couple vanishes into the cottage. The door shuts. The laughter dies down. And then, just when you think the awkwardness is over, someone nearby starts singing. Bless this bed and bless this bread. Bless the place they lay their head. If the baby comes too soon, we'll all know what they did in June. Laughter erupts. A chicken squawks. And you, already halfway to your sleeping mat, wrap yourself in your cloak and mutter, "I'm too sober for this." Morning in the medieval village comes whether you want it to or not, dragging a damp breeze and the unmistakable scent of old ale, sweat, and someone's very dead bonfire. The rooster sounds as if it's regretting its own life choices, and somewhere nearby, a lute hits the wrong note before being mercifully silenced. You roll over on your straw mat, back sore, eyes bleary, wondering if the betting celebration ever really ended, or if it just dissolved into drunken snoring and 3 chickens mysteriously missing from the barn. But there's no time for reflection. Because today isn't just any day. Today is the morning after, a crucial part of the wedding timeline, and yes, there are still customs to follow. You may have thought the awkward part was over. Oh no. Welcome to the medieval proof phase, the moment where curiosity, social ritual, and a weird obsession with bed sheets collide. First order of business. Breakfast. But not just any breakfast, bridal ale. A tradition that's half refreshment, half weirdly symbolic gesture. The couple is expected to share a special ale brewed specifically for the occasion. If you're lucky, someone remembered to actually make it. If not, you end up drinking 3-day-old swill with a sprig of thyme tossed in for romance. You glance across the yard where the bride and groom now sit on a log, blinking against the sunlight, wrapped in matching woolen cloaks and trying to look blissfully married. Their hair is a mess. Their expressions say, "We did what was expected, now please stop asking us about it." A group of ants hovers nearby, watching the couple sip from their shared mug like hawks eyeing a wounded rabbit. There's hushed chatter about whether the groom looked tired enough and whether the bride's braid is coming undone in just the right way. Subtlety is not a medieval virtue. And then someone brings out the sheet. Ah yes, the infamous proof of consummation. In certain communities, it was customary to display the couple's bedsheet to show that the marriage had been physically completed. Sometimes it was the parents who did the displaying. Sometimes it was a maidservant or midwife. Either way, it involved holding up a wrinkled cloth and pretending this was an entirely normal and tasteful part of any celebration. Now, let's be real, this custom wasn't universal. In some regions, it was more symbolic than literal. In others, it faded over time as privacy became slightly more fashionable. Historians still argue whether the bloodied sheet tradition was widely enforced or simply exaggerated by chroniclers with a flair for the dramatic. Either way, it happened often enough to be mentioned in records, and awkward enough that everyone you talk to today is avoiding eye contact. One merchant woman whispers that she once saw a family dye the sheet with chicken blood just to save face. They didn't want to explain anything, she adds with a wink. You nod slowly and make a mental note to never borrow linens from that household. Next comes the gift giving. It's common for guests, especially family, to offer small presents the morning after. These might include bread, honey, coins, herbs, or more practical things like a new pot or a bundle of firewood. Symbolically, it's a way to support the new household. Practically, it's also an excellent time for your second cousin to re-gift you that ladle you gave him last harvest. You offer your own humble gift, a small bar of hard soap wrapped in cloth. The bride accepts it with genuine gratitude and a tired smile. Hygiene may not be the height of medieval fashion, but even she knows this day will be filled with handshakes, hugs, and probably more than one mysterious spill. Then there's the first walk. In some traditions, the couple walks through the village together, hand in hand, to show that they are now officially united. It's sweet. It's symbolic. And it's also a great way for everyone to stare at them and make whispered jokes about the night before. The couple handles it well, eyes forward, steps in sync, expressions frozen in the medieval equivalent of smile through the pain. There's a quirky custom you overhear while trailing behind them. In certain rural areas, it was common for neighbors to plant a tree in the couple's honor. Apple trees were popular, fruitful, strong, and hopefully symbolic of the marriage. You see a man digging a small hole beside the path, then ceremoniously dropping in a sapling as the newlyweds pass. It's a tender gesture, right until a dog comes by and promptly ruins it. As the couple circles the central square, the villagers begin the final phase of the celebration, the naming of the house. If the couple is moving into a new cottage, it's often named in their honor. Something poetic, like Holly Nook or Dove's Rest, or something more practical like the one with the leaky roof. If they're moving in with family, well, good luck carving a name into someone else's lintel. You overhear the groom suggest calling their hut Swan's Nest. His uncle loudly suggests Goose Shack instead. The compromise, as voted on by 3 tipsy neighbors, is Nestling Hut. A little awkward. A little charming. A little cramped. Just like marriage. You drift back toward the main green, now littered with empty mugs, dropped bread crusts, and a half-deflated bladderball that the children had been kicking around. The feast tables are being cleared. The musicians are quietly tuning their instruments for one final song. And just when you think it's all wrapping up, someone produces a jug of sweet mead and declares, to the couple, One more toast. Why not? You raise your mug. Not just for the bride and groom, but for surviving a medieval wedding from beginning to, well, not quite end. Because in this world, the rituals never really end. They just fade into the next phase, running a household, raising a family, harvesting enough food, and making sure your neighbor doesn't steal your geese. The bride catches your eye and smiles, just slightly. Maybe it's the mead. Maybe it's the relief. Maybe, just maybe, it's happiness. Or maybe she's just imagining everyone going home. The wedding may be over, the ale barrels empty, and the guests nursing monumental headaches, but the real challenge for the newlyweds begins now, setting up their household. In a world without IKEA, electricity, or indoor plumbing, domestic bliss looks a little different. You might think marriage is about love and partnership, but here. It's mostly about wood, wool, fire, and relentless chores. Romantic. You wander past the couple's new cottage, a modest wattle-and daub structure with a thatched roof and a door that squeaks like it's seen things. It's not much, but it's theirs. If they're lucky, it came with a hearth, a bed frame, and maybe a pig pen. If not, well, hope they like sleeping on straw and negotiating with pigs over floor space. Setting up house in the Middle Ages involves a lot of resource gathering. You don't just move in with a bed, a toaster, and a scented candle. No. You need firewood, water, salt, herbs, dried meat, a kettle, if you can afford one, some storage baskets, and ideally, a large dog that can bark convincingly enough to deter thieves and nosy neighbors. This morning, the groom is attempting to chop wood. He's not very good at it yet. The bride, meanwhile, is hanging cloths over a line, probably wondering if she remembered to air out the sheepskins before the wedding. You offer to help, and she hands you a broom made from twigs and a look that says, "Sweep carefully or I'll feed you to the geese." In medieval households, chores aren't optional. They're survival. And there's no dishwasher, no running water, no central heating. If you want to stay warm, you keep the fire going. If you want to eat, you grind your grain, churn your butter, boil your water, and hope the roof doesn't leak. Every single day. The division of labor is stark. Traditionally, men handle tasks like plowing, chopping, and repairs. Women cook, spin, weave, milk, and tend to the hearth. But reality often requires flexibility. If someone breaks a wrist, or the cows need urgent attention, gender roles become more suggested guidelines than iron rules. Historians still argue whether peasant women had more autonomy in rural households than noblewomen in castles, who, ironically, had servants but far less personal freedom. And then there's the matter of sleeping arrangements. You peek inside the couple's home and spot their bed, a wooden frame with rope strung across like a hammock, covered in a straw mattress and a couple of woolen blankets. The phrase, "sleep tight," supposedly comes from the need to regularly tighten these ropes. The phrase, "don't let the bedbugs bite," is, tragically, not metaphorical. Personal hygiene is, well, let's call it seasonal. Baths are infrequent and often shared. Water is hauled in buckets and heated by fire. Soap is made from lard and ashes. If you want a relaxing spa day, you're out of luck, unless your idea of pampering involves cold rain and a horse brush. Meals are basic: porridge, bread, cheese, root vegetables, and whatever meat or fish you manage to preserve or barter. If you're feeling fancy, you add herbs. If you're feeling poor, you chew slowly and pretend it's stew. Salt is valuable, sugar is a luxury, and spices are worth more than some people's entire wardrobe. Speaking of which, The bride's clothing now reflects her new status. She's covered her hair with a coif or veil, signaling to the village that she's a married woman. This isn't just fashion, it's social code. Uncovered hair might imply flirtation or impropriety. You wear the veil, or you invite gossip. And in this village, gossip spreads faster than lice at a midsummer dance. Quirky tradition alert: in some towns, the groom is expected to plant a tree or install a new wooden threshold as a sign of new beginnings. One young man reportedly carved his initials and his wife's into the doorway lintel, then spelled her name wrong and had to recarve the entire thing. Romance, folks. Then there's the chicken. Yes, the chicken test. In some regions, the health of the couple's marriage was predicted by how well a chicken laid eggs in their home during the first week. If it laid a lot, the couple was fertile and blessed. If not, oh. You glance nervously at the scraggly hen pacing outside the couple's door. No pressure, bird. Despite the chores and endless needs, the first days of marriage hold a peculiar charm. There's the shared glances while kneading dough, the teamwork involved in patching a leaking roof, the quiet pride in planting herbs outside your very own window. You overhear the groom tell someone, "We built our fire without smoke last night." A small victory, but in this world, that's huge. And that's part of the medieval domestic rhythm, finding joy in the smallest successes. A smooth milking session. Bread that rises properly. A rat that doesn't steal your cheese again. These become the markers of a good start. Not fireworks. Not getaways. Just peace, and functioning cookware. Scholars sometimes debate whether these early days were joyful or simply another kind of burden. After all, young couples were under tremendous pressure, social, economic, and religious. One mistake, and the gossip flows like spilled mead. And let's not forget in-laws, who often live nearby or, worse, with you. Imagine trying to learn how to keep a fire going with your mother-in-law commenting on your kindling technique. Still, in the quiet of the morning, as smoke curls from the chimney and a breeze carries the scent of thyme and fresh loaves, you feel a sense of fragile calm. The couple sits side by side, eating porridge and trading shy smiles. They survived the wedding. They made the bed. They even found the missing chicken. In a world full of plagues, war, famine, and fleas, that's not nothing. You're starting to settle into this little village rhythm: chickens clucking, bread baking, someone yelling about a missing boot, and just when you think the drama's done, bam, here come the in-laws. Oh yes. You thought surviving the wedding feast and making your own cheese were the hard parts. Think again. Because in medieval marriage, in-law relations are less familial bonding, and more ongoing political chess match conducted with turnips and emotional manipulation. You stroll past the couple's home this morning and find the groom's mother already at the hearth, elbows deep in dough, loudly declaring that this is how real bread is made. The bride is nodding politely while gripping a spoon like it's a weapon. You keep walking. Fast. In many medieval households, newlyweds didn't just live near family, they lived with them. Extended families often shared homes, especially among peasants where space and resources were limited. A house might contain grandparents, siblings, cousins, and the occasional random guy who claims to be just helping out. Privacy. Ha! That's for monasteries and castles. This arrangement made practical sense. More people meant more hands to help with work, care for children, and defend the house from bandits or overly aggressive goats. But it also meant that every chore, decision, and bedtime story was subject to commentary from at least 3 relatives and a suspiciously opinionated rooster. In-law dynamics often followed a pecking order, with the groom's mother usually asserting the most influence. She likely sees herself as the keeper of tradition, the domestic expert, and the quiet authority figure who's definitely not judging the way her daughter-in-law hangs laundry, except she totally is. One folk saying goes, a new wife stirs the pot, but the old one tastes it first. Which, roughly translated, means, you can pretend to run this house, but I'm still watching everything you do. Historians still argue whether young wives had much real authority in these early days. Some say they were effectively apprentices in their husbands' households, learning from older women until they earned enough status to manage things themselves. Others argue that in tight-knit villages, women built power through community ties, midwifery, brewing, spinning guilds, that gave them quiet leverage even under the mother-in-law's sharp glare. And the men? They weren't off the hook either. A new husband was expected to obey his own father, work hard, and keep his wife in line, whatever that meant in a culture that measured obedience by whether the firewood was stacked properly and the children weren't named after saints the priest didn't like. In some places, new couples were given a small outbuilding or even their own cottage on the edge of the family's land. This setup offered slightly more independence, slightly. The family still provided tools, livestock, maybe even food supplies. And that meant strings. If your in-laws gave you a goat, they'd expect weekly reports on milk production, goat behavior, and whether or not you were feeding it the right clover. A quirky custom you overhear today, in parts of 13th century Germany, it was considered good manners for a new bride to present a loaf of bread and a pair of hand-spun socks to her in-laws on the 7th day of marriage. This was meant to symbolize warmth and provision. One bride who forgot the socks apparently endured 5 years of passive-aggressive comments about her cold feet. Sometimes, these tensions boiled over. A church record from Kent in 1321 mentions a family squabble of unusual intensity that ended with a cart full of cabbages being dumped through a thatched roof. No casualties, but plenty of bruised egos, and cabbage. But it wasn't all tension. There were bonds, too. In-laws often helped raise grandchildren, pass down family recipes, mostly involving barley and salted things, and shared their knowledge of household medicine, when to use yarrow for a fever, or how to make a poultice for aching joints. These skills weren't written in books. They were lived, passed down with each meal and chore, and yes, with a few too many unsolicited opinions. There's even a quiet moment later in the day when you see the bride and her mother-in-law sitting together, snapping beans. They don't talk much, but their hands move in rhythm, and something about the scene feels settled. It's not love yet. But it might be truce. Meanwhile, the groom is outside with his father, attempting to repair a wheelbarrow that hasn't worked properly since the last frost. There's some yelling. Some hammering. A lot of exaggerated sighing. And then, unexpectedly, laughter. They're figuring it out, splinters and all. Of course, if you were noble, your in-law problems came with extra embroidery and significantly more politics. Noble women were often sent far from home, married into families they barely knew. Their mothers-in-law might be icy, controlling, or outright hostile, especially if the younger woman posed any threat to the household status quo. One duchess famously refused to let her new daughter-in-law use the family silver until she produced a male heir. That took 3 years. Tea was awkward. Still, noble marriages came with perks, servants, wealth, privacy, sometimes. But also more pressure, more eyes watching, and more alliances to maintain. One wrong word at a feast could start a blood feud. One ignored courtesy could get you exiled to the family's least desirable estate. In-law relations weren't just emotional, they were strategic warfare. Back in your village, the day winds down. The in-laws head home, some muttering, some content, and the couple finally has a moment to themselves. You hear soft singing from the cottage and the gentle clatter of dishes being washed together. It's domestic. It's quiet. It's theirs. And maybe, just maybe, the mother-in-law will admit, eventually, that the bread wasn't completely undercooked. The honeymoon period, which, in medieval terms, means about 3.5 days of semi-privacy and slightly fewer interruptions from livestock, is quickly replaced by something far more permanent, the grind of daily life. And now, as you rise with the sun and stretch your aching limbs, it's time to witness the true test of this marriage, shared labor. Forget candlelit dinners or love notes. Here, affection is shown by who wakes up first to stoke the fire, who carries more buckets from the well, and who doesn't complain too much when the cow kicks over the milking pail. If you can survive household chores together, you're basically soulmates. You catch the couple at dawn, already moving with quiet urgency. She's grinding barley by hand, rhythmically turning the quern stone while humming an old tune. He's outside, struggling with a stubborn yoke as he tries to get the donkey to cooperate for the morning haul. Spoiler, the donkey is winning. In most medieval households, every member, man, woman, child, had a role to play. The newlyweds are no exception. Their marriage isn't just a romantic or religious bond, it's an economic partnership. Two people running a micro-business called Survive or Die Trying. Daily life is structured by the rhythms of the sun, the seasons, and the demands of the land. There are no weekends, no holidays beyond religious feasts, and even those involve more work, because who else is going to make 40 loaves of bread for the village saint's day? The chores are constant. The bride tends to the hearth, manages food stores, spins wool, tends herbs, and keeps the linen somewhat clean, a miracle, given how many people insist on wiping their hands on everything. The groom handles repairs, plows, fetches wood, maintains fences, and occasionally gets into verbal debates with chickens. But don't mistake these roles as fixed. When illness strikes, or goats escape, as they tend to do, duties shift. You'll often find women helping in the fields and men patching garments. Survival is flexible. Historians still argue how much say peasant women truly had in daily life. Some argue their work was undervalued and overshadowed by male contributions. Others insist they held immense authority within the home, economically, nutritionally, and socially. After all, the one who controls the food and the fire does hold power, whether the records mention her name or not. There's also the market. A few days after the wedding, the couple walks to the village green, where goods are traded. The bride has brought woven cloth and 2 jars of honey. The groom is hoping to sell a small bundle of firewood and some eggs. It's modest, but enough to swap for salt, dried beans, and, luxury of luxuries, a single lemon. Markets aren't just about goods. They're social hubs. You hear gossip about another newlywed couple whose pig refuses to cooperate, and about the tanner's daughter who ran off with a monk. The couple listens politely, but you can tell they're making mental notes: whose bread is the cheapest, who cheats on weights, which stall sells the good cheese without the questionable green spots. As the week rolls on, you start noticing the quiet rhythm of their teamwork. He leaves early to mend a fence, and she packs him a small pouch of oatcakes and dried apples. She weaves late into the night, and he sits nearby, sharpening a blade and occasionally handing her thread without being asked. They're not chatting much, but something is settling, like soil after heavy rain. Quirky detail time: in some regions, newlyweds would mark their doors with chalk to indicate new household in progress. It wasn't superstition, it was practical. Neighbors would know to offer help, lend tools, or not bang on the door at midnight asking to borrow a goat harness. If the couple succeeded in keeping their home intact for a full year, the mark was replaced with a blessing, often a symbol of prosperity, like a loaf, a sprig of rosemary, or a small carved spoon. And let's not forget the communal oven. Since most peasants didn't have their own, they'd carry dough to the shared oven, baking their loaves on assigned days. Today, the bride brings her first solo batch, 3 small loaves dusted with barley flour. She waits anxiously by the fire while other women nod approvingly, or whisper judgmentally. It's like medieval bake-off, only hotter and with more risk of singed eyebrows. The couple returns home that evening with warm bread and a slightly singed cloth. A win, overall. Later, as the sun sets and the scent of wood smoke curls through the air, they sit on the worn step outside their door. The groom mends a strap while the bride threads a needle. A cat stretches across their feet, purring like a small, furry furnace. They're not talking much, but you catch the bride smiling to herself as she tucks a stray lock of hair under her cap. It's not glamorous. It's not poetic. But it's real. This is what most of marriage looked like in the Middle Ages, not tournaments or ballads or forbidden glances across feast halls. Just 2 people working side by side, surviving storms, sharing chores, learning each other's moods, and maybe, if they're lucky, laughing together over spilled stew and lopsided loaves. In a world where life expectancy hovers somewhere around, don't sneeze too hard, finding someone who'll hold the bucket and the umbrella. That's love. It's been a few weeks now, and the couple's days are starting to blur into that familiar medieval rhythm: sunrise, chores, meals, more chores, prayers, sleep, repeat. But there's a new question lingering in the air. One that brings whispers, cautious glances, and the occasional unsolicited herb bundle from a well-meaning neighbor. Is there a baby on the way yet? Yes, dear listener, we've arrived at one of the most defining, and pressure-packed, elements of medieval marriage: fertility and children. Because in a world where lineage, labor, and legacy all depend on producing offspring, the entire village is more invested in your womb than you are. Subtlety? Never heard of her. You pass by the couple's cottage one morning and spot an elderly woman slipping a small pouch under the doorstep. It's a fertility charm: rosemary, rue, and a few dry beans wrapped in cloth. Supposedly it encourages conception. Or it's an invitation for rats. Either way, it's happening. In the Middle Ages, children were not just wanted, they were needed. Peasant families required help with the land. Noble families needed heirs. Even monasteries wanted fresh batches of children to recruit as future monks. There was no such thing as a neutral stance on reproduction. You had them, or you were barren, a term that came loaded with stigma and superstition. Women were expected to bear children early and often. The ideal? Many births, closely spaced, with a healthy son as soon as possible. The reality? Difficult pregnancies, high infant mortality, and limited understanding of maternal health. 1 in 3 children didn't survive past their 5th birthday. 1 in 10 women died in childbirth. And yet, the cycle continued, largely because there weren't alternatives. Historians still debate how much medieval people understood about reproduction. They knew the basics, of course, but theories about fertility varied wildly. Some believed moon phases affected conception. Others thought certain foods, like almonds or leeks, could increase the odds. And one old manuscript claimed sneezing after sex was an effective form of birth control. You're welcome to test that theory, though we strongly advise against it. The pressure wasn't just emotional, it was public. A newlywed couple without a pregnancy after a few months would begin to attract attention. Sometimes it was subtle. A neighbor asking if you feel a bit off lately. Sometimes, not so subtle, like a midwife dropping by uninvited to check the color of your urine. If a year passed with no pregnancy, people began talking. And the blame usually fell on the woman. She'd be advised to drink special brews, combinations of herbs like mugwort, sage, and fennel, or to make pilgrimages to holy sites associated with fertility. In extreme cases, she might be sent to confess sins she didn't remember committing, just in case divine judgment was involved. But infertility wasn't always blamed on the wife. In some regions, it was acknowledged, albeit quietly, that the husband might be the issue. There are accounts of manhood tests involving cold water and candle wax that we won't get into because, well, sleep stories shouldn't include psychological trauma. One surprisingly progressive element. Midwives. While male physicians often stuck to vague theories and endless prayers, midwives had practical, experience-based knowledge. They advised on pregnancy, delivery, and postpartum care. They knew which herbs could induce labor and which ones to avoid. And they often formed tight-knit support networks for new mothers. Quirky fact alert, in some towns, it was common to gift a woman in labor a necklace made of dried apple seed strung on flax thread. It was meant to bring comfort and open the womb. Whether it worked is debatable, but the intention was sweet, and slightly crunchy. You hear rumors that the village midwife recently delivered triplets. One survived. It's a bittersweet story, one that illustrates the constant tension between joy and danger in medieval childbirth. Every pregnancy was both a celebration and a gamble. When the bride starts feeling queasy one morning, 3 people rush to bring her chamomile, mint, and that soup that worked for Cousin Alice. No one says the word yet, but the village is buzzing. You watch as the groom tries to act casually tripping over a bucket in the process. His grin gives him away. By week's end, the priest is including prayers for the fruitful in his sermon, and the bride's aunt is knitting something that may or may not be a bonnet. It's unofficial, but the expectation is locked in. Everyone is waiting. And what of those who couldn't have children? Couples who tried, prayed, and still ended up childless. Some were pitied. Others were quietly respected. Occasionally, they took in orphan children or raised nieces and nephews as their own. There were even stories of couples devoting themselves to God's work, helping the poor, maintaining churches, or providing support for other families. In noble circles, however, childlessness could be catastrophic. A barren wife might be cast aside or replaced. One lord famously annulled his marriage after 5 years without an heir and sent his wife to a nunnery, with a small stipend and a note that read, "May God soften your spirit." What a charmer! Still, not every family wanted a dozen children. Many peasants understood the strain that large households could bring. In some cases, couples deliberately spaced out pregnancies using herbal remedies or prolonged breastfeeding, one of the only semi-effective birth control methods available. Families might favor 3 or 4 surviving children. Enough to help, not so many as to starve. You sit by the well one afternoon, watching the bride and groom carry water together, their steps still in sync. She pauses halfway, presses a hand to her belly, and smiles faintly. He notices, steps closer, and says something you can't hear. But you don't need to. The moment says enough. The sun dips low. Chickens cluck in their sleep. Somewhere, a loom clicks softly. The world keeps turning. And inside one small cottage, something new, tentative, hopeful, warm, is just beginning to stir. By now, the couple's story has become part of the village fabric. Their routines are familiar. Their cottage smells faintly of bread and wool. And their names are spoken in passing, sometimes fondly, sometimes with a chuckle, and occasionally with the vague suspicion that someone borrowed your wash basin and never returned it. But their marriage? It's no longer just about them. It's become part of the community. Marriage in medieval society wasn't a private affair, not even close. It was a cornerstone of village structure, religious life, and, frankly, gossip networks. Once the wedding's over and the baby rumors begin, the village doesn't just watch your life unfold, it participates in it, critiques it, and occasionally shows up uninvited with a chicken. This morning, you follow the couple to church. It's a feast day, and the village has assembled in full force, polished boots, ribbon braids, even the goat looks mildly presentable. The bride walks beside her husband, head covered, hands folded. They sit together near the front, a quiet symbol of their bond and their place in the parish. There's something touching in the way their shoulders almost, but not quite, touch. In medieval Christian Europe, the church didn't just oversee your marriage, it defined it. From banns to vows to offspring, your union was a sacrament, a social contract, and a source of spiritual anxiety. The local priest likely conducted the wedding, blessed the marriage bed, and is now silently praying that the young couple will produce faithful, non-heretical children who tithe appropriately. You hear the priest reference Saint Margaret, patron of childbirth, in his homily. A few women cross themselves reflexively. Others nod toward the bride. No one says anything, but everyone's thinking the same thing, soon, perhaps. Because a marriage without a spiritual frame was viewed as incomplete, like bread without salt, or an ale jug without a handle. After church, the community mingles in the square. And this is where the real social glue thickens. Marriage might be sacred, but intermarriage is strategic. Families form alliances through weddings, not just among nobles, but among peasants, too. A well-matched marriage can combine plots of land, secure a dowry, or settle a simmering feud over fishing rights and cow paths. You overhear one woman suggesting her niece as a future bride for the blacksmith's second son. Another insists that she's saving her daughter for a cooper, because, and I quote, "will always need barrels." Love, in medieval terms, is often secondary to practical matters like property, labor potential, and whether your prospective son-in-law has a decent thatch roof and tolerable breath. These decisions are rarely made by the couple alone. Elders, priests, and village gossips all have a say, sometimes loudly. You might find yourself encouraged toward a match because your fathers were friends, or because someone heard you both like turnips. Romance might bloom later, or not at all. Historians still argue whether love played a significant role in peasant marriages. Some argue it was rare and irrelevant, others suggest that, while practical considerations dominated, affection could and did grow with time. There's even evidence of divorce by mutual consent in some village records, though it was rare, frowned upon, and usually ended with one person mysteriously moving 3 towns over. Meanwhile, the newlyweds are figuring out how to live in harmony with not just each other, but with everyone else. They must attend village feasts, contribute to harvest efforts, and lend tools when asked. They must host the occasional traveler, respond to the parish summoner, and navigate the ever-changing alliances of village life, without offending the reeve, the baker, or the lady who claims to talk to squirrels. There's a charming tradition you witness later in the week, the work rotation. In small communities, couples take turns helping each other with big seasonal tasks. One day, the couple joins neighbors to thresh barley. The next, half the village turns up at their home to repair a roof and share stew. It's less about efficiency and more about reciprocity. If you help others, they'll help you, unless, of course, you water down your ale. Then you're on your own. This tight-knit structure has its perks. Children are raised communally. Elders are respected, if occasionally grumpy. Young couples learn from older ones, usually by being corrected in the middle of tasks they thought they understood. There's a rhythm here, ancient and enduring. Your joys are shared. So are your failures. But village life also has its dark side. Rumors spread like mold on rye bread. One misplaced word, one misunderstood look, and suddenly people are whispering. You hear one old man mutter that the bride walks too far from her husband, and another claims she talks to the apothecary a bit too often. Both comments are met with scowls, but the damage is done. In medieval society, reputation is everything, and it's delicate. Still, the couple navigates it well. They attend gatherings, share their harvest, offer help when someone's thatch collapses during a storm. They seem content, not blissful, not dramatic, just quietly steady. You even catch them laughing during a turnip harvest, teasing each other about crooked rows. Quirky tidbit: in some villages, married couples were judged based on the straightness of their furrows, literal lines plowed into the field. A neat, even field meant good teamwork. A wobbly one. Let's just say eyebrows were raised. As dusk falls, the couple walks home, arms full of herbs and dried apples from a barter. They look tired but content. There's a dog trotting behind them, tail wagging. A child calls out, "Good night, mistress," and the bride waves, her veil fluttering in the breeze. They're part of the village now. Woven into its fabric, bound by duty and dirt, laughter and labor, superstition and Sunday Mass. And maybe, just maybe, the turnips really do taste sweeter when you've grown them side by side. The seasons shift again. Days shorten, nights lengthen, and the wind begins to whistle through the thatch with a distinctly judgmental tone. The couple, now married many months, move with practiced ease through their routines. You can tell who fetches the water, who starts the fire, who remembers to bring in the goose before nightfall, and who always forgets to latch the back gate. This, right here, is the long game of medieval marriage: endurance. Romance is a luxury. Endurance is survival. Winter brings new challenges. The fields are quiet now, save for the occasional digging for turnips or the hurried burial of compost under frost. Most work shifts indoors: mending, spinning, grinding, and that ancient tradition of sitting very still while trying not to freeze your limbs off. You join the couple by their hearth one morning. The fire crackles, the cat is curled like a cinnamon bun near the embers, and both spouses are working in silence. He's repairing a broken stool, she's darning a sock that may once have belonged to a bishop. The days are quieter, but not easier. Food stocks dwindle. Firewood must be rationed. If the couple was wise, or just lucky, they've salted enough pork and dried enough peas to last them through until spring. If not, well, let's just say, thin broth becomes a staple phrase. You'll hear it a lot. One morning, you wake to find the bride collecting snow in a bucket to melt for washing. The groom is fixing the shed door again, despite swearing last week it was fixed, for good this time. Marriage, it turns out, is mostly refixing things you've already fixed, and learning to pretend you're surprised each time. A neighbor drops by with extra lard. The couple reciprocates with a small cloth of dried thyme. No coin is exchanged, but both parties nod as if a contract has been signed. Because in this world, generosity is currency, and every warm favor is a small act of resistance against the cold. The mood indoors changes with the weather. Conversations are longer. Songs are sung by firelight. Jokes, terrible ones, usually involving goats, are retold for the 100th time, but still draw laughter. You begin to understand that marriage isn't just about duties. It's about weathering sameness together. The 1,000th meal. The 10,000th, did you see where I put the shears? The moments when nothing big happens, but it happens together. Still, not all is calm. There are arguments. Tension. Even here, in this quaint little hearth-centered life, disagreements emerge. Over salt. Over chores. Over the appropriate use of the good spoon. You witness one tiff escalate to the point where the groom sleeps with the pigs. They don't seem impressed. Quirky tradition alert: in parts of 14th century Wales, there was an actual, first fight, custom. If a newlywed couple quarreled, they were sometimes gifted a loaf of bread and a piece of cheese wrapped in cloth by their neighbors, symbolizing nourishment through friction. It's either heartwarming or extremely passive-aggressive. Historians still argue whether medieval marriages grew stronger over time or simply settled into dull resignation. Letters from noble couples sometimes express deep affection, others read like barely disguised hostage notes. Peasant life left few written records, but the oral histories suggest a mix. Some couples thrived, others tolerated, and a few, well, you don't see everyone's partner at church every week, do you? One day, the bride falls ill. Not dangerously so, but enough to stay in bed, pale and quiet. The husband tends to her, fumbling with a wooden cup of broth, trying to remember which herb is supposed to lower fevers and which one accidentally causes visions of talking badgers. His worry is visible. He checks her forehead constantly. He stirs the fire with unnecessary vigor. He even, shock of shocks, cleans. You see him swatting at cobwebs like they owe him money. She recovers, slowly. And something changes. The way he brings her tea now includes a small smile. The way she thanks him includes a touch on the wrist. It's not fireworks. It's not poetry. But it's intimacy. Quiet, resilient, hard-earned. Later, they sit together weaving rushes into mats. She braids quickly, he's all thumbs. She teases him gently, and he shrugs with theatrical defeat. The moment is so simple, so unremarkable, and yet, so full. You realize that in this world, where death, famine, and plague are never far, still being here is its own kind of miracle. The cold deepens. A neighbor loses a cow. Another's chimney collapses. The village pulls tighter together, forming a quilt of human connection stitched with soup, prayer, and occasional shouting. The couple contributes where they can, sharing grain, helping repair fences, offering space by their hearth for an elderly widow during the coldest nights. Their home, once just a hut with uneven stones and low beams, is now a center of warmth. Of steadiness. Of unspoken understanding. And this, perhaps, is what medieval marriage looks like at its best: two people who have learned each other not just in celebration, but in repetition. Not just in ceremony, but in silence. People who know the rhythm of shared labor, shared hardship, and shared rest. As spring begins to hint at its return, faint birdsong, mud instead of snow, you see the couple step outside together, look out at the fields, and simply breathe. No words. Just the quiet satisfaction of having made it through another winter. Together. Spring arrives like a slow exhale after months of holding your breath. The frost recedes. The soil softens. The sun, that elusive flirt, finally lingers long enough to coax out shoots of green and the occasional honeybee, wobbling about like it's had a bit too much mead. The couple stands in the doorway of their home, blinking against the brightness, faces warmed by the first rays of sunlight in weeks. Everything around them feels like it's stirring, birds building nests, sheep shedding their winter bulk, and neighbors suddenly reappearing like mushrooms after rain. It's a season of renewal, yes, but also of proof. Because in the medieval world, surviving the winter doesn't earn you a medal. It just qualifies you to start over. This is the time when married life stretches its legs. There's planting to do, livestock to mend, debts to reckon, and, if the rumors are true, a small bundle expected to arrive before harvest. The bride walks a bit slower these days, a palm occasionally resting on her belly. The groom, perhaps noticing this new gravity, carries the buckets more often, without being asked. Spring is also when the village takes stock. Fields are measured. Seed is divided. The reeve makes his rounds with that suspiciously judgmental goose again. And amid all this bureaucratic bustle, the couple tends their modest plot, turning soil with hands that now know each other's rhythms, each callus a shared story. One morning, the bride plants a row of leeks while the groom repairs a fence post that seems to resent existing. You notice how they work in tandem, he hums, she laughs, and neither seems to mind the mud. A few older villagers pass by and nod, the kind of nod that says, yes. They've settled. And in a medieval village, settling is the ultimate compliment. As the days grow longer, their home becomes a small hub of gentle chaos. Children wander in with questions. An elderly widow brings dried apple slices, for strength. The local healer drops off a potion wrapped in waxed cloth, telling the bride it's, just in case the baby comes during a storm. No one says it aloud, but the entire village seems to be quietly adopting them, weaving them deeper into its patchwork soul. Then comes Midsummer's Day, a brief, beautiful moment when everything blooms at once. The villagers gather near the church to sing, feast, and dance in circles that make more sense if you've had a few mugs of ale. You sit beneath a tree and watch the couple, her in a simple green dress, him with flowers tucked behind his ear, probably not on purpose, laughing, spinning, collapsing into each other like children too dizzy to stand. There's a lightness to them now. A confidence, even. You remember their first awkward days, her unsure of the bread, him burning the kindling, both avoiding eye contact when the midwife dropped off instructional herbs. Now, they move like a team. A funny, stubborn, enduring team. Quirky custom time. In some villages, married couples who had made it through one full year were gifted a carved spoon and a piece of lace, a sort of, you didn't kill each other, award. It symbolized harmony, the spoon for shared meals, the lace for the threads of daily life. This couple, by the looks of things, may get theirs embroidered. Historians still argue what made medieval marriages successful. Was it endurance? Children? Land? Church approval? Some suggest affection mattered less than community standing. If the couple functioned, contributed, and didn't start public brawls, they were considered a good match. Others argue that emotional bonds, though undocumented, were real and powerful, hidden in gestures and glances rather than ink and parchment. The wind down of summer brings more harvest work and fewer idle hours. You see the couple up before dawn, gathering barley, threshing alongside neighbors, cheeks dusted with sweat and flour. There's a rhythm to it, almost musical. Not glamorous. Not easy. But deeply human. In the evenings, they sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes silent. He plays with a scrap of carved wood, she knits small socks for small feet. Outside, the stars will overhead, indifferent and ancient. Inside, the warmth pulses softly, hearth to heart. One night, just before sleep overtakes them, you hear her whisper, "Do you think we'll still be doing this when our hair is white?" And he replies, "If the goats let us." Which is, honestly, peak medieval romance. And so, the wheel turns. A marriage that began with awkward kisses and uneven loaves has settled into something solid, weathered, real. Not perfect, but enduring. And in a world where famine lurks, plagues whisper, and the road to tomorrow is never promised, that's everything. Now, as our journey winds down, the village grows still again. The fire burns low. The animals have quieted. And inside that little home of wattle and daub, two figures sleep beneath a wool blanket, their hands just brushing in the dark. The air is cool, tinged with ash and the faint sweetness of rosemary. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls, and a breeze moves gently through the thatch, soft as a lullaby. The chaos of the day, the carts, the gossip, the goats, is gone now, folded into memory like a blanket at the foot of the bed. You've walked beside them through feasts and frost, through chores and childbirth, through laughter, arguments, and shared silence. You've seen what marriage meant, not in fantasy, but in dirt and dough and stubborn hope. You felt the rhythm of a life built not in grand gestures, but in small, steady acts repeated over time. A fire tended. A floor swept. A meal shared. A promise kept. And now, it's your turn to rest. So, let the soft hum of the night carry you. Let your thoughts drift like smoke rising from the chimney. Let your breath slow, deep and even. You're safe here. The village is quiet. The world outside can wait. Sleep well, dream gently, and know this, in another time, another place, someone just like you once sat by a fire, watching shadows dance on the wall, holding a hand they'd come to know as home.